There's room for everyone in this movement, and showing up is one way that you are just making a big difference. So thanks for being here. Thank you, Shannon McKeedy and NEAC, for having this meaningful panel, and I'll turn it over to Shannon.
Thanks, Shanti, and thanks everyone for coming out on a Monday night. My name is Shannon James, and I'm the Campaigns and Advocacy Director with Montana Environmental Information Center. And we're here tonight, as Shanti mentioned, to talk about nuclear energy, which a lot of people are placing a lot of hope in right now as a solution for the climate crisis. And I encourage you all to come into this panel with an open mind as our panelists dive into some of the historic and present impacts of this industry. And another thing worth mentioning is the nuclear industry has always been high risk, but with recent federal deregulation, it has become an even more dangerous industry and technology. And the Trump administration is currently mandating expedited approvals for new reactors and deprioritizing safety in a big way. So I think we can all agree on the fact that these new reactors, which no small modular reactors do currently exist in the U.S., it's worth noting, we want to put public health and safety over industry interests. And we also don't want to be all gloom and doom tonight in this discussion, and we are not naive to the fact that we do need a just clean energy transition now. And so we will be touching on safer, cheaper resources that are readily available now. And with that, I would love to introduce our panelists. Down the end, we have Shelly Fyant, who is the Root Salish and the mother of 4 adult sons, 7 grandchildren, and 2 great-granddaughters. Her people were removed from their traditional homelands in the Bitterroot Valley in October 1891, after 36 years of resisting removal. She currently serves as the Food Sovereignty Chair for the Arley Community Development Corporation. She has focused her work on food security since 2016, when she served on the CSKT Tribal Council. While on the council, she saw the tribal purchase of the Salish Kasanka Kalispe Dam and the finalization of the long-negotiated water compact, which returned the Bison Range to the CSKT. Shelly is serving her first term in the House of Representatives and the Montana State Legislature, representing House District 91, covering parts of the Flathead Indian Reservation, Lake, Sanders, and Missoula counties. She was an active voice on 2 nuclear bills this recent legislative session, fighting for amendments to protect tribal sovereignty around nuclear development in Montana. She lives in Arley in the Jocko Valley near her mom and cherishes the time with 5 generations her family enjoys. Next, we have Otto Braided Hair III, who is the Northern Cheyenne community organizer with Honor the Earth. Otto is dedicated to supporting Native communities through renewable energy, cultural revitalization, and workforce development. He has a background in construction, fiber optics, and energy systems, and has managed projects that reduced energy burdens for families while creating meaningful job opportunities. Otto has also worked with colleges and community members to develop training programs that prepare people for high-paying technical careers and to strengthen local capacity. His work is rooted in preserving culture, sharing knowledge with the next generation, and ensuring they have the tools to build sustainable and resilient futures. Last but not least, we have Nick Fitzmaurice, who is the Energy Transition Engineer with Montana Environmental Information Center. Nick has been with MEIC for over 2 years now and holds a BS in Industrial and Management Systems Engineering from MSU, focused through a minor in sustainability and environmental stewardship to establish a technical foundation from which he grounds his energy and environmental advocacy work. Before MEIC, he worked at the university's Office of Sustainability for 4 years and was a key contributor to securing an ambitious carbon neutrality goal for the institution. He has also worked in Washington, D.C. in energy policy and modeling. With MEIC, he works to create the conditions for a clean and affordable energy transition in Montana by lobbying at the legislature, engaging in decision-making processes at the Montana Public Service Commission, and influencing other key energy-related decisions throughout the state. Thank you for all coming. None of these folks live in Missoula, by the way. They did all travel to be here today. Thank you. context around the history of nuclear energy in Montana.
Sure. Thanks. And I guess I would open saying that while there's likely folks in this room that have been participating in the legislative process in Montana and certainly following nuclear developments in Montana much longer than maybe I've even been around. MEIC has been in the legislature for the last 50 years and then some, following all the things that have developed, and I'm lucky to be a part of that continual legacy. And I guess I would start giving the context of back in 1978, I believe, there was a citizen-led initiative that was passed by a vote of the people of Montana. I think it was 60% of voters or more voted that if we were to ever have a nuclear generating facility in the state of Montana, that there would have to be a vote of approval from the citizenry to approve that. That stood in place for the last many decades until actually recently in the 2021 legislature when the lawmakers at the Capitol passed a bill to overrule that and change the statute. So no longer is there that protection. Now is, while the original provision was brought about by a vote of the people, that was just the legislators at the convention at that time. So fast forward now to the current most recent legislative session that concluded at the end of April this year. There's still been, as we've kind of alluded to, there's all this interest and conversation at the national level and kind of throughout really clean energy circles, but also across the board about the potential for nuclear energy. And we've seen that in our state. We've seen the conversation about bringing nuclear energy to Colstrip. And with that, a representative from Colstrip, Representative Gary Perry, had a couple bills looking at not just removing those barriers for bringing nuclear to the state, but actually encouraging. The two bills were House Bill 623 and House Bill 696 that were one allowing for storing nuclear waste in Montana and the other for allowing uranium enrichment and processing facilities to be built in Montana. And there's a lot of conversation, a lot of debate at the legislature for those two bills, but where this lands us today, and definitely will have Representative Fyant talk more to those bills and where they went. But now we're looking at inviting this industry into our state, and now that's where we land, where we want to really be scrutinizing what this actually means, what it means for costs, what it means for impacts, especially to the Indigenous communities in our state. And I'll leave it there because I'm sure we're going to talk a lot more about it.
Thanks, Nick. Shelly, Nick already mentioned House Bill 623 and 696, the two nuclear bills from this past legislative session, but I was hoping that you could tell us a bit more about those.
Well, thank you everyone for being here tonight. As she mentioned, this was my first session in the Montana State Legislature, and I had served two previous terms on the CSKT Tribal Council, so I went over to Helena thinking I was going to listen and learn and kind of take a back seat, figure out the process, the people, the players, and immediately I got on defense because someone had misspoken about the CSKT Water Compact, and so I had to straighten the record, or, correct the record for that. And then I felt like I was playing defense the rest of the whole session. So I got put on the committee, Energy, Technology, and Federal Relations. So kind of a conglomerate of, like everything else. And so we heard the bill on uranium and nuclear. It was at the end of February, which is about halfway through the session. And going into that committee, I knew a little bit about hydropower because the tribe, we had saved for 30 years to purchase the former Kerr Dam. And our tribe had put aside $500,000 every year, except 1 year, for 30 years to purchase that dam. So I learned a lot about hydropower going into that. So, and just a little side note, I was always puzzled why the feds didn't consider hydropower a renewable, in that it never got any federal subsidies like solar or wind. So that was the first thing. Another little side note, in the first couple weeks of the session, we didn't have any bills to discuss, so we had these educational presentations on nuclear energy. And I left that day feeling like a used car salesman pitch, only like 100 times worse. I didn't know at that time anything about nuclear, and just the information that I was given, I thought, there's an ulterior motive coming down the pike. And sure enough. So a little bit more about the committees. They're, of course, Democrats being the minority. All the committees have a majority of Republican players. And in the 2023 session, there was a supermajority of Republicans. So the Democrats couldn't get anything passed. Anything that they initiated. So I just wanted to set the stage there for going into the 25 session. In this last session, we did elect 10 more Democrats, so we were 42 out of 100. So we had a little bit more negotiating power, and people had to take us more seriously, because really we only needed 8 or 9 moderate Republicans to side with us and, help us pass legislation. So, but what I experienced going into the session was straight party line voting. And I was a little bit surprised about that, because I thought, with my mixed heritage background, I could work across the aisle. So my dad was bitter at Salish. My mom can trace her ancestry to 7 different European countries. So I've always been in a position to help facilitate understanding in both my professional and personal life. So that's how I was going into the legislature, thinking I could do that. So this bill came up. It was introduced by Gary Perry, who's the chair of the Energy Committee. And he has been for a while. It was co-sponsored by Braxton Mitchell, who was the majority whip, Katie Zolnikoff, who's the House Speaker pro temp, so she's like second in charge, and Greg Hertz, a longtime senator from Polson. And I mention the co-sponsors because the players are important in any bill that's introduced. You just have to look at who co-sponsored the bill and realize the kind of backing it's going to get. So they have power with their positions and their seniority. So this bill came up establishing legislative approval of the siting of spent nuclear storage facilities. And in our Energy Committee, it passed 12-2. So myself and another Missoula Democrat, Bob Carter, voted against it. So it goes to the House floor next. And in the meantime, MEIC's Executive Director Ann Hedges said, would you be willing to, or anyone in the caucus be willing to carry an amendment to this bill to require the county electors to approve this, as well as majority of tribal members within 50 miles of the siting. So I said, yeah, well, I think so. So Jade Sept, who's the Northern Cheyenne representative, her and I went to Chairman Gary Perry's office and said, can we talk about this amendment? And he said, sure. So we, asked him about, the proposed amendment. And at first he was wondering why we said 50 miles. Well, why can't it be 25? And he went on about, well, I really want to use Montana boys in the construction of this. And I want to take it to, colleges, including Chief Bill Knife College, to train people to work in this facility. And Jade said, yeah, I could introduce you to some people at Chief Bill Knife College, if that's your intent. So by the end of our conversation, we were just listening. He was talking himself into it. And in the end, he said, yeah, I'll consider that a friendly amendment, which is what bill sponsors usually do. So that day that it was presented on the House floor, he changed his tune and basically said, well, I don't consider this friendly or unfriendly, but you can vote for it or not. And that we were just taken aback because he had told us it was going to be a friendly amendment, which if the bill sponsor says that, then their party's going to go with them. So he said, don't worry about it. He said, the counties, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is going to, have oversight over this anyway, and they'll consult with the counties and any tribal organizations. So Jade presented the amendment, and there was only one question from the audience, and it was a representative from Thompson Falls, and he said, does it need to be a majority of the county voters, of the county electorate, or just the majority of whoever shows up to vote? And she explained just whoever shows up to vote. So I got up on the floor that day and first of all said, the Northern Cheyenne Nation is a sovereign entity. It's not a tribal organization. Thank you very much. And there are federal mandates, there are executive orders that require tribal consultation. And, I know that very well because when I was chair of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai Tribes, when President Biden established another executive order following Obama's lead, I spent probably my first 3 months in tribal consultations. And what that meant was we were at the table helping to develop the policy, not given the policy after it was developed and say, what do you think? So I know very well about tribal consultation. So that amendment passed 52 to 47 that day, keeping in mind there was 42 Democrats. So it passed 52 to 47 that day. And then the bill passed 85 to 14. Jade and I voted against the bill. That royally made him mad, and so he said he wouldn't consider it on the next bill, on the uranium bill. So that was the background behind that. Sorry it took so long.
Thank you, and thank you for all your work in this past session. Otto, what's happening right now in Colstrip around nuclear?
Well, I think there's a lot of fear that's happening in Colstrip. Actually, myself, I worked in 2018, around 3 years at the coal-fired plant. So I got to see that very intimately, and of course I would not recommend that to nobody. It's dark and dismal, and everybody hates each other out there. So, there's a lot of fear that's happening in Colstrip. Of course, it's a town that has been built around coal development. Coal is providing the power, supposedly. But right now, I would say there's a lot of fear that's happening in Colstrip. It's a small town, but it has a really big coal plant there. And of course, any of that energy goes outside of Montana to Washington, Oregon, and areas like that. There isn't much of a support for the town itself, so these big companies are coming in and utilizing that, proposing these SMRs, so the small modular reactors, to kind of bank on the community's fear of losing their jobs. Now, my time working at the plant itself, when 1 and 2 were shutting down, there was a lot of people just leaving their homes, just up and out of nowhere. They would leave their quads there. They would leave their washer and dryers there. They were just up and leaving over to either Pennsylvania or Texas or anywhere. And so right now, there's a company that is proposing a small modular reactor there, and they're piggybacking on this energy demand, which there's plenty of alternatives out there right now that we can say. And even some of my tribe, I used to work as the renewable energy director for the Northern Cheyenne tribe, and identified some like earth batteries, iron batteries, hydropower, which is more in alignment with our cultural and traditional values. That these small modular reactors don't fall in line with that, and so they're proposing these I would say pressure intrusive projects, because we are in the outlines of Colstrip, and banking on the fear that's happening in Colstrip. Now, I used to be a Colstrip member myself. I used to live there. I used to understand it. I used to be fearful of losing my job myself there. But no project should ever come at the cost of our community, no matter if it's Caucasian, Native American, African American. We're all human. We all breathe. We all see. We all walk. We all, we're one and the same. Doesn't matter where we come from. Our blood is red. It's all the same. So there's a lot going on in the little town of Colstrip, and I would say that Northern Cheyenne right now is looking out for the betterment of the land, not just for ourselves, but for future generations and everyone who's going to move there. It's not just for us. We don't ever just think about just us. Every nation out there is on the same alignment of that they want to help every community. And of course, we ran up against oppositions ourselves. We've been forgotten quite a bit. And our voices have been lost. And for the passing of those bills to take away the voter rights, it hurts us even more, because now we have no voice at all. We're not going to be heard at all. And the community members in Colstrip are not going to be heard. So, yeah, there's quite a bit happening in the little bit of town of Colstrip, Montana. But I think we're moving in the right direction, because there is opposition in the community itself. There's this cash grab. There's this big, this is going to make our community a lot of money. And I'm sorry, I don't have really fragrant terminologies. I usually like to speak on layman's terms, because that's just the way I work. But it's more just a cash grab. There's more just around these data centers. That's what this SMR is going to be more utilized for, and it's for AI technology. And I encourage everybody here to take a look into AI technology. Each time that you send through Gemini, Copilot, ChatGPT, spends about 40,000 gallons of water for each prompt, just to inform you of what's really happening out there. And I believe that we're missing critical thinking in our communities everywhere. And that's not just within my community, it's everywhere. And we have to look at AI technology as it's making things too easy on us. And I'll stop there.
Great, thank you. Nick. So nuclear energy has gained a lot of support recently as a low carbon fuel source. These conversations often gloss over cost. Can you tell us more about that side of the story?
Thanks. So if I were to guess, I would think that we're here at a Missoula Climate Week event. There's likely folks that are on a spectrum of feelings about nuclear energy, and there's a number of reasons for that. I've myself kind of moved along that spectrum over the last few years as I've learned about the energy system and what's really driving decisions within that. I do understand that there is kind of this underlying fear of impending climate impacts and this need to decarbonize energy. So I guess I want to put that out there up front, because I came from being, seeing in the media that nuclear energy would be an option for us for addressing climate change, and learning more and realizing that I don't know if that necessarily is actually the energy we want to be banking on for our future of decarbonized energy for our communities. And there's a number of different angles and ways to slice that. But one thing that I think gets glossed over is just the cost and actually the viability of this technology to deliver energy to our system in a timely manner to actually meet the need to decarbonize. There's a lot of information or just talk in the news about nuclear energy, but if you actually look into it and see where this technology is, you know that there's only been one nuclear plant actually built in the United States in the last 30 years, and that's in Georgia. Vogtle plants 3 and 4 came online in the last number of years. I think the most recent one was possibly 2023. Those plants took about 15 years to build, which was nearly a decade behind schedule. They cost $37 billion, the most expensive power plants that have ever been built. And now we're looking at talking about bringing nuclear energy online to address this impending need for new load. We heard about AI data centers that are causing these massive load demands. But when you look at it and realize that this technology is actually not coming online in a timely fashion, it's costing the ratepayer and taxpayers a tremendous amount of money. And I think we'll touch on more later the alternatives. It just becomes kind of a question of why are we actually pushing for this technology. And we talked a little bit about small modular reactors supposed to address some of these issues, but to date there's still actually no small modular reactors that have been built. Supposedly there's maybe 1 or 2 in China and Russia and maybe somewhere else in the world, but nothing in the United States. There's one outfit, NuScale, that has a licensed design. They had their pilot project canceled in Idaho back in 2023 after I think the price tripled from maybe $3 billion to $9 billion. And that's just pretty much a miniature, larger reactor that's still going to have the same problems, just not generating as much electricity. So that's where I come back to where it's like, if I, on the one hand, think about all the impacts of the uranium life cycle to our communities in Montana, and what you're going to do with that waste, that's one side of the coin. And then if you actually look at the other side of, can this technology actually deliver in the way that folks say it can, it would really appear that it can't. So that's kind of where we've landed at MEIC, and why this event is here today is to talk about this and dig into it more about why this technology has gained so much attention.
Great, thank you. This question is for Shelly and Otto. Cost aside, can you two tell us about the historic impacts to Indigenous communities from nuclear energy development and the uranium fuel cycle? And if we force nuclear in Montana, what impacts might our Indigenous communities experience?
Yeah, so if you go back to some of those plants they were talking about, historically they've been put in Indian country, and it's a matter of environmental justice to me. So there was a plant on the Navajo Nation, I think it was called Church Falls or Church Creek, something, and it was put on the Navajo Nation. I personally have a friend who died from uranium caused, or cancer that was caused from uranium. I think we can do better. There's more affordable, sustainable, reliable power in, solar, wind, geothermal. I think we can do better for our children. When I look at the safety and the public health risks, and I think about just the cost of it, not to mention, do we really need artificial intelligence? Do we really need data centers? Have we run out of, and I actually said this on the House floor, have we run out of genuine intelligence that, we can't think for ourselves anymore? But for me, it comes down, again, to the environment. We're a very place-based people as Indigenous nations. We just had Standing Rock less than 10 years ago, and we brought light to the world about the importance of clean water. for life, for all life, not just human life, but plant life, animal life, everything that sustains us. So I really think we can do better for our children. I think about, the cost of it as well, who's funding this? Are we so, I know we're run by capitalism across the planet, but I think there's going to be a time, and I think it's just right around the corner, that something's going to happen, and we're going to have to take a step back and really realize what our priorities are. The pandemic did that for me. I had to sit back, watch everything that was going on, because I had a sovereign nation responsibility on my shoulders. I was the chair of my tribe at the time. And so I dug really deep to figure out what my priorities were for my family and for our tribal nation. So those are the things I think about, is the environment. Otto mentioned the amount, or one of you mentioned the amount of water that it takes just for one search, one AI search. Really? I think Montana's in at least year 3 of a drought. In my little valley, in the Jocko Valley, we mentioned the water compact earlier. Well, guess what? Our water's now going into a pipe instead of a ditch to be more efficient. And what's going to happen now? We're going to lose all of our trees, then the birds go away, and then the rodents take over. That is a proven fact in the state of Washington. That's what happened when they piped their water. So everything has a consequence, and I think there's a lot of unintended consequences out there. So for me, it comes down to just the whole environmental justice issue. Why are you going to put something on or near a reservation without their approval? And the rest of the story about that bill and the amendment was, the amendment was tacked onto the nuclear bill, but Chair Perry went around to the Senate and got it stripped. And so when it came back to the House, and we had to approve it without that amendment, he mocked me on the House floor and said, yeah, I'm doing this for my grandchildren. I don't care if it's in my backyard. I'm doing this for my grandchildren. So that was like a gut punch to me. So.
I think we should go ahead and go build it in his backyard and see how he feels about that. Well, specifically speaking for the Northern Cheyenne Nation, we're under a co-op, so we don't get to experience the ratepayer increases, but we do get to experience the ramifications of a close proximity to storage. One of the things that they're proposing is that this long-term storage can last for half-life of the spent nuclear energy for 1,000 years. Who here has been alive for 1,000 years? Anyone know anybody that's been alive for 1,000 years? No one. So they're proposing these ideas off of numbers and such. And we really do have to look at future generations of this. It's not going to impact us. Maybe we'll get a big check in our pocket, but what do our future generations, 7 generations, got to deal with in the future? That's the mindset that we need to have with these intrusive projects moving forward. And with the how much it's going to cost. I know that the Northern Cheyenne Reservation is not going to be impacted by that. Well, I can't say that for sure, but others in the community will have to experience that. Just mentioned from the New Scale project, from it tripling from 3.4 billion to 9.3 billion. That's a lot, And on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation right now, what we're experiencing is there are homes that have electricity bills from $800 to $1,200 a month. And being the renewable energy director, we move towards renewable energies to kind of offset that, because we want a quality of life, and that's not just for us, just for everybody, And it's not saying that every project out there. It doesn't have some excavation involved with it, but I don't hear too much about our future generations being impacted by a solar panel. I don't hear too many, some statistics around wind that's going to affect our future generations, or hydro. There's this, ongoing notion of, well, we can't reuse the project, we can't reuse the windmill and stuff like that, but imagine that you have some radioactive material just 20 miles from your house, and for our reservation, we live on one of the biggest aquifers, Powder River Basin. If that leaks into our water, we can no longer go to our springs anymore to get water. We don't have city water like everyone else does. We have spring water, and that I encourage everybody to go out to Crazy Head Springs on the northern Cheyenne Reservation. Crisp and clean, so clean, it tastes great. But we won't be able to do that anymore. Our neighbors and our natural allies, the Northern Arapaho, have to deal with excavation of uranium. They can no longer hunt on their lands, but they hunted there for thousands and thousands of years before bureaucrats stepped in. Why take that away from a community that has been established themselves, that has been there for thousands of years? And we got to start thinking about the children that are moving forward, the ones that, in our language, we say the ones that have yet to come across. They cross in our way is they cross a river to come here. We have to think about those individuals. So I would say in our language we say magad. That means money. Magad does not mean more than my child. Magad does not mean more than your children. And these projects are going to come in here and challenge that. It's not worth it. So there's quite a bit of opposition within the Northern Cheyenne community, as among other Indigenous and communities. And I can say right now that we're banding together. We're getting together and we're communicating, because we're hurt by how well this land has been taken care of. And we're getting educated. We're getting to the point where we can stand up against these oppositions. And that's what we're seeing today, is we're getting to the point where we're just done. We're tired of hearing the bicker back and forth of what's good for our community. It's just what's best for the land. The land gives us everything. It gives us nourishment, gives us a place to plant our feet without it floating in space, right? So it goes goes along with just values of anyone. It's just take care of what you got, respect what you got. And I know I kind of went off on a little bit of a tangent there, but I guess to return back to the question, it costs a lot. Sorry.
Thank you. And I do think it's worth noting that the nuclear cycle poses such a major health impact, the entire cycle, starting from the uranium mining, the reactors themselves, and the radioactive waste, which we still have no long-term storage solution for. All right. For the whole panel, anything else you'd like to add that we haven't touched on yet?
I would just talk a little more about the alternatives. We've talked a lot about the issues that we see with nuclear as a carbon decarbonization solution, and that's not to say we can't decarbonize. The issue that we see with nuclear, and one of the reasons that it is gaining so much attention, or that folks are so interested in it, why we might guess that our utility is so interested in it, is that it is expensive, and we have those that are serviced by Northwestern Energy. Northwestern is a monopoly utility. They're shareholder owned, and they make money off of the money they spend. So they have an incentive to buy the most expensive infrastructure, rate base that, charge the customers for that electricity, and then make a 10% return on equity on every dollar that they spend. So there's one kind of perverse incentive structure that's baked in. And then you look at some of the alternatives we have, solar, wind, We're looking a lot more at enhanced geothermal energy technology and its potential to possibly serve this baseload need that folks talk about. That's not necessarily a necessity to run a reliable grid. It is one way, but there's also the ability to build more transmission infrastructure to operate the grid in a way that weather patterns across a large geography can supplement power needs where the wind is blowing, where the sun is shining, to provide that power in different locations with battery storage that is available, that's being deployed at massive scale in states like California, states like Texas, that has the leading wind deployment. And if you look at that and you look at the energy that's being deployed, I'm going to throw out some numbers. I hope I don't lose anyone, but Northwestern Energy, their average service territory, they're serving 760 average megawatts. So that's just shy of a gigawatt of power at a given time throughout the entire state of Montana. The one nuclear plant that came online, Vogel, those two plants each were about a gigawatt, and those took 15 years to build. However, in that same time, just last year alone, the power that came online in the United States was about 60 gigawatts of clean energy in largely solar, about 35 gigawatts of solar, wind energy, and battery power to support that. And those are projects that take months to maybe 3 years to put online. Recent, I think the Beaver County project, a wind facility in Montana, just came online after under a year of construction. This is power that can be running electrons to our homes in a matter of months to a few years and is available. It's being built everywhere and it's cheap. There's no fuel. There's not a fuel cycle that we have to deal with. There's not the uranium cycle to deal with. You fire up a solar panel, a wind turbine. There's certainly maintenance from time to time, but there's not a constant fuel source to be feeding that. And that's the same with the potential for enhanced geothermal to access heat beneath our feet, where you just pull that energy without having to fuel something. And that is a tremendous cost benefit. It's a tremendous environmental benefit to not have to be constantly burning through some kind of fuel source.
I think to continue off of what Nick was saying is, I put, I want to say 20 of our community members of Northern Cheyenne through some training. And training for renewable energies is pretty entry level. Anyone can go in there. There's not much to it. You just have to be willing. As far as the companies that want to bring in these, specialists and technicians, you have to go through years in order to become this person that can work with it. So as opposed for 15 years to somebody who is just coming off the street to learn this and then just take off with it, there's no comparison there. And I really appreciate what I've learned about the renewable energies, because truth be told, 6 years ago I wasn't behind renewable energies. I just didn't understand it, and can't attribute to malice to what you can attribute to incompetence. I just didn't know. I really didn't know. The more I did my research and started looking into more research on the renewable energies, it just made more and more sense for every community. There's job opportunities. There's opportunities for people to have careers and advance themselves, and it's a really great community. Every contractor that I've ever worked with to do microgrids, I think we installed 375 kilowatts this past year. 15 of our community elders, knowledge keepers is what we call them, got to experience this. And the cool thing is that $800 to $1,200 bill that I mentioned earlier, they're only paying like maybe $100, which is not average for outside of the reservation. So that's the stuff that we have to deal with on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation. Is we have these companies that just have these outlandish rates, and we're just trying to find a good solution for our community to live, really. And we just want to live, honestly. We want to live just like anybody else. We want to go fishing, we want to go hunting, we want to go traveling and such like that, but we're just, I think every Indigenous community has experienced it, and that's just being forgotten. So one thing I wanted to kind of share is I don't have any business cards, but really, if anyone wants to connect with the Northern Cheyenne Reservation, reach out. We're all in the same alignment of wanting to protect Mother Earth for us to continue living here. Not in a way that's, unguided or misguided. It's just that we were given these gifts without really being told why, I'm a traditionalist, I'm a culturalist. I grew up in what I'm going to say is Tensistas way, the Northern Cheyenne way. We have sweats, we have sun dances and such like that. But I'm also understanding the Christianity way. There's two languages of prayer being spoken on our reservation. And so what I'm doing is kind of connecting those two. And there's no difference. There's really no difference. Prayer is prayer. We use it on the daily to make ourselves strength, to give ourselves strength. And there's the armor that I've heard spoken of in church, because I just recently started going to church within the past 2 years, and I've heard about the armor. I think, excuse me if I get this wrong, it's the helmet of salvation, the breastplate of, well, there's a bunch of armor on there, and I apologize, but the way that we look at it is our armor for the Northern Cheyenne Reservation. The shield is our air. Our arrows are the land. And our breastplate is our water. That's our armor. And it's so coveted in our reservations, amongst every reservation, just because it's being challenged by these projects like this, that most communities don't understand that even though either like Class 1 Air Act that the Northern Cheyenne Reservation has, it only covers some things. We're looking to bolster that. We're looking to make that more, to strengthen that against these large companies that just want to do a cash grab. And these cash grabbers, we all know them. I mean, actually, I don't know if I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but Google, Amazon, all these Meta, all these people that are, these companies are out there that just want our money. They look at us like numbers. We're not people to them. And in our Northern Cheyenne community, people are people. Souls are souls, spirits are spirits. And so I just want to kind of encourage everyone here. Like I said, I don't have my cards just yet. Working on that. But if you want to help us, just even a way of sharing some light. It doesn't have to be a donation or anything like that. But if you want to get involved. Get involved. We have a large network too. We work with other nations. We work with Northern Arapaho, Southern Arapaho, CNA tribe, Cheyenne Arapaho, Ogallala, the Good River Nation, the Menominee, the Minnekoju, the Onishnida. The nations are starting to speak together, and we're just starting to realize that it's time for us to step up. It's time for us to fill these roles because Mother Earth is not being taken care of. And it's because of this cash grab that's out there. And I get it. That's why I worked at the plant. I wanted to make more money. I wanted to have a boat. I wanted to, go out fishing and everything. But then I started realizing, what is the work that I'm putting into right now? Where is it coming from? How am I going to align with my cultural teachings that my children can be proud of? So that's where I come into play, for the Northern Cheyenne Reservation. I don't speak for all of them, but I can say that at least the Northern Cheyenne Reservation is in alignment with just protecting Mother Earth. So that way we can have it, If we go back to the dinosaurs, and if you believe in everything like that, the things that happened between their time was millions of years. This right here is not going to affect us. Mother Earth can shake us off like a bad case of the fleas. But we're trying to make it to where it's livable for us right now. 7 generations, 6 to 8 generations, 9 generations. And tell Mother Earth says, okay, I'm done with this. And she can go back to however she lives. So, I guess to kind of go back to sharing outside of the questions and everything is just connect. Don't be afraid to connect. You don't have to come from any kind of cultural background. You don't have to come from anything specific. We are open. The door is open, always. And we just want to connect with everybody. We're tired of being visualized as this, I think every Indigenous nation is visualized as this closed off group. That's like you have to know some things in order to be incorporated. No, just be respectful. That's why I tell everybody, you want to be Northern Cheyenne? Respect the land, respect what you got, pray, give thanks. That's it. Everybody else can be Cheyenne. And if you amplify that, those are the basics. Come into the nation. Say hello, knock on our door. We're always open. I'm really saying that. With our cultural leaders and where we are now, come say hello. We'll say hello back.
Thank you for that. So between the time I was elected in November and before I went to Helena in January, I reached out to some of the tribes along the High Line because I know they have wind resources that aren't fully developed yet. So the first person I contacted was a planner that I know on the Fort Peck Reservation. And I asked him if they'd ever done a feasibility study for their wind. And he said, no, I'm a one-man show. We don't have the capacity here to do that study. We don't have the money to hire someone else to do the study. And that's pretty much how it is. I contacted a friend at Fort Belknap. She pretty much said the same thing. If they have an economic development or a planning department, it's a one-person show. So, and I go back to my tribe's experience. We started with the Department of Energy, did a solar study, did a wind study, and then we ended up turning that department into Energy Keepers when we purchased the dam. So I think there's a lot of unused, untapped resources out there and in Indian country that could be used to create energy to put on the grid. And then transmission becomes the problem because we're not fully where we should be as far as transmission. But the last thing I want to say is there were several solar bills, more wind bills in that energy committee that I served on, and there was a very negative vibe about wind energy. It's like, oh man, when in the winter, it's gonna, flick ice into people's, homes or cars or whatever. It's gonna kill people, and there has to be so much space between wind turbines, and then a solar shares bill got passed in the Senate, and it came back to the House, and the House passed it, and then the governor vetoed it. So, it's a process. The legislature is a process. It only happens every other year in Montana for 90 days. So I would just challenge everyone to be involved, get involved, make those phone calls, write those emails, show up in Helena, talk to your legislators about what really matters to you. And I know for a lot of us it goes back to those values that we were raised with, about taking care of the land, and then she will take care of you.
Just to share a little more, with the, I just had a thought, I'm sorry. Around the projects that kind of happen around the reservations, because we have a lax in, well, I shouldn't say lax, it's just because we don't have the things set up to defend ourselves. That's where these big companies are really targeting. And it's not just only Indigenous communities, it's economic decline communities, it's African American communities. They want to take advantage of us. And that's happened time and time again over the centuries. And there's a lot to learn from Native communities across Turtle Island. There's so many communities that have just bits and pieces to what the overall objective are of Native Americans and Indigenous communities. I would say it's more specific because with the Northern Cheyenne, we were raised in one area, so a lot of our beliefs we come from that one area. And much with other Indigenous nations, But if you talk to each individual one of them, the leaders, the community members, they'll tell you it's about taking care of Mother Earth. It's really about taking care of Mother Earth. That's where we all connect. And you know, like I said, it's a big cash grab by these big companies that utilize fear in our communities. We're going to apply jobs. You guys are going to have really good paying rate, you know. And the research that I found, a lot of these companies will just hire on their own guys or bring them over from other, you know, where other projects happen and help the community out. So, you know, it's a lot of fear mongering. It's a lot of taking manipulation, and you know, like I'm pretty sure every nation is we're just tired of it, and you know, that's why, you know, I come here for that. But I just want to share a little bit about that. Is these big companies are, another thing I wanted to share is, I don't know really what words to put it, but we're in competition with other countries with technology. Who has the best technology? Oh, you know, we had the best, you know, army, and everybody else wanted to do the same thing. They wanted to have the best and the best and the best. Well, now AI technology is one of the competitions, and these competitions are coming at the cost of communities, and it's not fair. It's really not fair for us to pay for these bureaucrats sitting up in their rooms or wherever in their offices making the decisions just for us. Why don't we get a voice in any of that? So I just want to share that there's a little bit more to this AI technology than everyone thinks. It's I mean, 5 years ago, cool. That was really cool. I was like, wow, you know, somebody else can think other than for me, you know. Leave it up to them. They can do the thinking for me. But the more I dug into it and the more I became aware, the more understanding that I had that it's just more than coming at the I guess the making an individual's life easier, but it was more of a higher level technological warfare, maybe. I don't know. Maybe that's just too strong of a word, but there's a competition out there, and we're very much a part of it, even though we don't know it.
Thank you. And one thing that Shelly said reminded me that we are having a transmission webinar on October 14th. If anyone's interested, we can't transition without transmission, so that's on the MEIC's website if you are interested. And we another solution that I think Nick mentioned is geothermal. We are also having a webinar about that in November. Just a shameless plug for those. But I would like to open it up to audience questions. Do you need the mic? You want it up to you?
Yelling at us.
It's not going to reach everyone, but.
Okay. Great presentation. I really enjoyed it. I'm someone who is more neutral. I look at the pros and cons of all. I would also challenge the way each of you are also thinking about it, and I think it could be reframed. Because let's take, there's each of these points which we could talk about, like the fact nuclear is renewable and we can recycle it. Granted, due to the change in administration, I believe the last time it was about in the 80s, that was canned after corporations have put billions of dollars into creating a refinery and ability to reuse a lot of our nuclear fuels. And today, not a lot of companies are willing to take that risk because they lost billions of dollars at a swipe of a pen. So the nuclear industry does not need to continue to mine new uranium, thorium, whichever it might be, because we have more than enough fuel. And just because it's called waste, it's not really waste, because most of that fuel is still at 2% enrichment or at some variation, and then the mixed oxide fuels still contain other desired material in it, which can also then be used as additional fuel. It's just most of our reactors today cannot use that fuel, but there is still plenty of technology that can actually go in and use that fuel and continue to use it for a very long time, but that requires refineries and reprocessing factories. But one of the biggest things I want to point out is that housing the waste, I would challenge, would be a really good thing. And the reason I say that is once Montana becomes an agreement state, that means the NRC has the ability to come in, but taking a step further, the IAEA ultimately has ultimate say, and they're known to come in and do periodic check-ins and what I would also say is that it forces Colstrip to actually start monitoring how much radiation they're actually emitting per day, per month, per year. Because within a kilometer of Colstrip, it's about, just ballparking it, about 2 to 5% elevated radiation emission just in the surrounding area in radon and other radiological. Then you have about 95% of radiation that is in the coal ash that is being pulled up. And if you start gathering that per ton, the larger quantities that you get of that, the greater the radiological emission is. And Montana doesn't really classify a lot of coal ash as radiological waste, which is a very hazardous waste on top of the arsenic and the other aspects of it. So it's like something that we can either fight or we could leverage it to actually improve our communities. And then, like, if we look at the death per terawatt hour, nuclear is still amongst the lowest. I do agree with you that there's a lot of companies out there that just want to come in and just make a profit, and they really don't care about how they hurt the communities or impact. But there are still companies who are willing to basically cut a loss and use nuclear technology in a positive way that actually helps the land. And even if one of your statements was to protect the land, and no matter which way we go about it, energy density, power density, it's still amongst the greatest. Is you don't need as many solar panels, as many windmills, or anything like that, but nuclear will not replace any single one of those. It's more of a collaborative, just a diverse profile of energy production. So would it be possible for, let's say, commercial companies who are willing to take the responsible role in it to work with various indigenous people and nations and, let's say, Montana as a whole, to actually make it into a positive experience? Because people talk about the Global 1, Global 2, which were the most recent one, through Mount Island. It's now coming back online. But there's also the SMRs, but there's also other avenues within nuclear that is rarely ever talked about. So there's a lot of sides that which you say is the downsides to it that really aren't a problem, like the nuclear waste really is not a problem, considering that it's still fuel that can be used, and geothermal is also great, but that's also still a nuclear reactor that's deep down in the earth. That's just a natural reactor that we're getting energy from. So I guess is there still room to work with the various nations and people just to bring about the possibility of good nuclear use, commercial use in Montana? Because do you know what the IAEA charges a company per day just for disregarding regulations, or just a simple procedure? $1 million a day for every day which a procedure was basically neglected. And that goes up from the time it's found out all the way up until it's rectified. So, is there any avenues to work with the various nations? Is the big question. Sorry, that was a lot.
Thank you for that. I think it's really good to have an awareness around, the different alternatives and, different options. I think I can sum it up to, would you want one in your backyard?
Yes,
I would
have it, considering the nuclear emissions. Like,
Sorry. No, you're fine. You're fine. Well, there's one agreement to that. Now imagine 4,000. Now imagine 12,000 that just don't want it. Because it's just much like buying a used vehicle. You're putting all the money up front. They're saying it has enough salt to make it down to Pasadena. You don't know what this car looks like. You don't know how it functions. NewScale tried doing the SMR themselves. It was increased by, what, triple the money that it would normally cost for an SMR to be installed. Not only that, there's not anyone alive that can really say that these long-term waste storages are functional. And then you start to put that on top of aquifers. You know, there's just too much risks to that. As much as the numbers come out saying that it's going to be great, as they come out saying that it's going to be functional and stuff, how do we know? Most of those people that came up with those numbers are going to be dead and gone in 100 years, 2 decades, 3 decades. The information may stay, but how do we know for sure that we are going to be protected? And it's not that we're not willing to work with, you know, the energy demand. And I think there's a lot of piggybacking off of that energy demand. I think you know, I would say 5-6 years ago, I was right in your position. I wanted to find out a good balance between everything. But it shouldn't come at the cost of the livelihood and lifeways of a community. You might be in favor, but what about your neighbor? What if they don't like it? What about your next neighbor? What if they don't like it? What if the neighbor after that is okay with it, and you just keep going down the line and you find out that there's not really a real good way of understanding from your community to say this is the better way to move it. And then also that, why are large companies focusing in on indigenous communities? Why don't they come and propose one to Missoula? Why don't they come propose one to Lobo? Why don't they come propose one to Corvallis? There's a bunch of land area around here. Why not utilize that? Why are they only coming to native nations, African community nations? Why don't they look at some areas that they already have on hand and utilize the technology that I might say that is not available to utilize spent nuclear and develop it? Make it better. Make it better to where it doesn't come at the impact of people that are living around it. So I would say there's no opposition to living clean, living in a more synergistic manner. It's just that there's too many risks that are associated with nuclear. There's too many risks that are associated with coal, and my community already had to experience that. And so we're looking at more of fine-tuning. Go identify some spot that the U.S. government has under their wing that they can develop all this stuff that's not going to harm anybody. Why is it always coming up to indigenous communities? That's my rebuttal question, is why are all these projects being proposed on indigenous communities?
I just want to say, I can't speak on behalf of my tribe, but I know that each tribe is their own nation, and so they would have to be approached individually. When I asked about this storage waste facility being proposed at Colstrip, I said, what about accidents? What about, how can you tell me this is bulletproof or bomb-proof or earthquake-proof? Have they been tested? Has nuclear waste been tested in earthquakes? What about climate change? I was involved in this Smurfit Stone restoration, remediation, we've been waiting on EPA for decades now to help us figure that out. And they said, oh yeah, the berm is fine, we're not worried about the berms unless we have, the 100-year floods. Well, 2 years in a row we had 100-year floods. And so you can't tell me that these are accident-proof or that safe. The last thing I'll say about this is, it's kind of like you could be a target in Montana if you had a nuclear facility, just like Maelstrom, we could be a target there. So in this age of terrorism, I don't even want to think about that.
And I would add briefly, and then maybe we can get to some more questions before we wrap up. I think that there's certainly a lot there. I think if you're going to look at fuel reuse, there's certainly other pretty contaminated waste streams that generates. There's costs associated with that. I think that there's certainly regulatory hurdles, but there's other reasons why that hasn't been something that's been pursued. And you still have to go through the whole cycle of extracting fuel from the start and then doing something with it in the end. And I think that really the important piece here is that the legislation, at least that we were talking about, the provision, the amendment would have required local tribes to have a vote to say we want this in our community or we don't. And that's the amendment that didn't get put on the bill. That's kind of the opportunity for respecting sovereignty that was passed up. And I think something that has been on my mind a lot about the health impacts of nuclear is that there's a lot we don't actually know. Generally, the biggest impacts of radiation exposure, those come to light later in life. They're carcinogenic cancers, and there hasn't been governmental research to the extent that's needed into what the actual radiation exposures are. And what the long-term impacts are. I think that the stat about deaths per terawatt hour of power impacts of nuclear, I think folks like to say no one's ever died from nuclear energy, but there's certainly been nuclear energy radioactive exposures. Sure, there is one accident at a facility, but where are the carcinogenic long-term early death impacts reflected in those numbers? If you look at the disasters like Chernobyl, you look at the children that were following that and the increased instances of birth defects, developmental disorders associated with that. Those are real livelihood impacts that aren't reflected in the numbers because no one's researched it. They're in communities that the funding for research isn't going towards. And I think the last thing that I would just touch on, which is a whole issue in itself, is just the kind of underlying ties in technology, in workforce, in infrastructure between nuclear energy facilities as well as the development of nuclear weapons. A nuclear engineer is a nuclear engineer. There's certainly a divergence at some point, but the fuel source is similar. The chain reaction decay, there's similarities, and if there's a lot of ties between developing nuclear energy, trying to make a good public image for it, along with while the U.S. military is spending $1.7 trillion completely overhauling the entire nuclear fleet in the U.S. And that's a whole other issue, but I see that a lot where the Department of Energy houses both nuclear weapons and nuclear energy, and those are really a lot more intertwined than I think most folks recognize.
Thanks, Nick. I feel like we have time for a few more quick questions. Oh, in the back.
I can protect this. Nick, you started the session talking about how there was something in Montana law saying that you needed a public referendum to talk about nuclear in Montana, and then was it just to remove that from our laws? Is that an accurate summary of what that happened?
Yeah, thank you. In 1978, there was a referendum of the people of vote that said if there's ever going to be a facility built, we will have to vote to approve it. And yeah, in 2021, the legislature overturned that, gave up the people's voice in that matter.
So instead of dealing with the thing that our government 30 years ago put in place to protect us, they just took the thing out?
Yeah.
How is that legal?
Yeah, and that's what lands us here today is the referendum process. The citizens can say that they want something, and then the majority of the legislators voted in their own process to get rid of that. And there's a lot of alarms around that, because I think that, I haven't been following the legislature for a very long time, but I don't think it's all that common for them to overrule that kind of referendum.
Do you want this?
Good. It's my understanding that Missoula is a nuclear-free zone. Is that still the case? And can the legislature overturn what our local government adopted years ago?
Amy?
I can answer that. So, yeah, it's still, Missoula's still a nuclear-free zone in about 1978.
Right.
Yes. I wanted to give a somewhat different perspective. I guess I mostly want to say that I'm not as confident as has been expressed that the decarbonization path we're on without nuclear is a done deal. And I'm a bit concerned that the way the problem's being framed here, it's being politicized a bit. I think of our energy problems as being global, not national, not statewide, and we've got to do the decarbonization. And I think it would be foolish to discard the nuclear option now when there are ideas being developed which are different than the ideas which cost so much. I mean, the small modular reactors to me are an interesting option that needs to be pursued in the interest of decarbonization. I also have a question on this question on the waste storage. There was an enormous amount of research went into the Yucca Flats storage project in Nevada that got killed for political reasons. There's no identified site for waste storage in Montana, is there?
It's proposed right at the moment.
Sorry?
It's proposed right at the moment.
Where?
Colstrip. Colstrip is the proposed idea is Northwestern Energy wants to convert it into a nuclear facility. So the waste storage is around, I want to say 20 miles from the Northern Cheyenne Reservation, but it's just proposed right at the moment. They're catching the feels from the community on how they would react to it. That's not a long-term thing like Yucca Flats? Is it just a temporary storage for the operating? I mean, one thing about waste storage, there are 9,000 metric tons of waste being stored temporarily now because the political issue of where to put it has not been decided. And I think we need to address the nuclear waste problem rather than rather than using the nuclear waste problem as a reason not to do more nuclear. We have a lot of nuclear waste right now. We've got to do something with it.
Certainly. I think there's a portfolio of problems that we're addressing here. Nuclear waste is certainly one of them. Yucca Mountain was supposed to be our golden ticket to have a solution. I think the EPA proposed maybe 8 different sites. Everyone said we don't want it. There was maybe 3 at the end, and eventually someone stuck it with Yucca. My understanding, they did some preliminary studies at Yucca, and their equipment got water damaged because this mountain that's supposed to be dry was actually pretty had an aquifer there. So that wasn't a suitable solution. Certainly, before we have any development, we should have a long-term solution. Right now, nuclear waste is being stored on site in any facility. That's what this law was saying. Said if we're going to bring nuclear to Montana, we're going to store the waste on site at the facility. That's short-term storage for 100 years until someone figures it out. And to your other point, I would say if we're going to keep exploring small modular reactors, certainly it should be not disproportionately impacting Indigenous communities, and it shouldn't be on the back of ratepayers. It should be funded by folks that want to figure that out and bring costs down. Because right now, we have other energy options they're cheaper, and if we let the market decide, nuclear is just going to be left behind because it's not actually the viable solution to decarbonize at scale at this moment.
Do you have a quick question? Just like a super quick question, because we are close on time. I noticed you were raising your hand. So I didn't.
Are you talking to me?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, it's quick. And I can just speak out up right here. I think we need to look at all energy solutions, but there's no denying that the Achilles heel of nuclear, the current reactor fleet that's based on uranium and plutonium, is dangerous. It's been overburdened communities, brownfields, Native American communities, etc. So we got to take care of the waste problem. We haven't, although I can talk a little bit about that at our time. The other thing is that for baseload power, nuclear is probably the best way to go. But I don't want to put all of our eggs in the nuclear basket. We need to look at solar. We need to look at renewables, such as wind, geothermal, and there's other batteries, storage, that kind of thing. So I think as a person who works in medicine, with nuclear medicine, that saves millions of lives a year, there's no other way to treat these tumors other than using nuclear materials. I'm going to say that I'm pro-nuclear medicine, I'm pro-nuclear power, but I'm anti-nuclear waste and anti-nuclear weapons. So I think there is something of a middle ground as far as the benefits and detriments of all the different technologies. We got to take them all seriously, or we should at least look at them seriously. But the way it's structured now for nuclear, it's dysfunctional. It's not properly structured, and we could use thorium and not have fissile material and not have weapons. But we went down the wrong path during World War II and in the 50s, based on Jaime Rickover, the admiral of the Navy. It was his force of personality that forced us to go on the uranium pathway. And it's not too late to look at other options. It really isn't. Look at thorium, look at natrium, things like that. But where we're at now, it's not sustainable, or nuclear should not be the dominant way we're going to try to decarbonize things. It just isn't the way to go.
That's what they have in Canada, right?
What's that?
Thorium.
Thorium.
So what they have in Canada.
Yes, the CANDU reactors that they have in Canada, there's no fissile waste. They burn their own waste. It's fantastic. Canada did the right thing when they had the chance. So just look at CANDU reactors, and they're doing fine with no waste because they use it as fuel.
You have to break thorium.
Right, but the idea is, but thorium is not fissile, so thorium is not something you can turn into a weapon. So the CANDU reactors are very safe and functional and been running for 50 years. Canada produces 90% of our nuclear medicine isotopes that we ship from them to treat our own patients in the United States because we don't have that technology, nor have we invested in it.
I want to stop you there. Thank you for your comment and thank you for your work in the medical field. We are very over time. We will be sticking around if anyone wants to chat with any of the panelists, who we should give a round of applause. And thank you, Finance for Missoula, for hosting this amazing week of events. Check out their website to see what else